Who truly wrote the first legends of the Wild West? Was it the outlaws with their quick hands and cold hearts? Or the lawmen who stood for justice in a land that knew none? We remember the names etched in history: Billy the Kid, Jesse James, Wild Bill Hickok. But who held the pen that first gave them life? In a place where a man's reputation was often more real than the man himself, stories weren't just for entertainment. They were currency. And in a town like Redemption, which had more dust than dreams, the most valuable currency was hope. That's where our story begins, with a man named Arthur Doc Finch. He wasn't a gunslinger. He carried a scalpel, not a six-shooter. His war wasn't with men, but with disease and despair. And in that old leather satchel of his, he carried not just medicine, but something far more potent. He carried stories. He came to Redemption at a dark time. A shadow loomed over the town. A name whispered in fear: Cassidy the Serpent Cole. He was an outlaw who didn't just rob banks. He stole a town spirit. His legend was built on violence, on the idea that might makes right. While Cassidy built his legend with fear, Doc Finch began to write a different kind of story. Not about outlaws and gunfights, but about the quiet courage that lived in the hearts of Redemption's townsfolk. He came to prove that a tale well told could be more powerful than any bullet. The only question was, would his stories be strong enough to change the very heart of the Wild West? After Doc Finch's arrival in Redemption, things remained the same. Dusty roads, harsh sun, and fear held sway. But then he began to do what he did best: listen. He sat down with a blacksmith, a man who had lost an arm in an accident and could no longer fight. He didn't ask about his struggle with bandits, but about the story of how he bravely defended his family when a wild cougar attacked, and he, with nothing but a hammer, drove the beast away. Not because he was a warrior, but because he was a father. Doc told that story to others in the saloon. The men initially laughed, but then they listened. Little by little, stories of small but courageous acts began to spread. A tale about an elderly woman who had hidden food for her neighbors during a drought. A story about a boy who saved a dog from a dry well. These weren't the legends of gunslingers. These were the legends of people. Cassidy Cole heard these stories. At first, he mocked them. Childish tales. Stories can't stop a bullet. He and his gang returned to Redemption, but this time they didn't just come to rob. They came to steal the stories. Cassidy gathered everyone in the middle of the street. He stood on a wooden barrel, arrogantly proclaiming, "I am the legend. My power is measured in gold and gunfire. Your stories are just empty words." Doc Finch stepped out from the crowd. He wasn't carrying a gun. He was just holding his leather satchel. Eye to eye with Cassidy, he said, "A story cannot be shot, Mr. Cole. It lives in our hearts and our memories." Cassidy laughed heartily. "Tell me, old man, what story will you tell to stand against me?" Doc looked straight at Cassidy, but the story he told was about another man in his gang, a young man with a hardened face. Doc told of a child who once lived in a small house by a river, with a mother who taught him how to garden. He wasn't a bad child. He was just a hungry child. He worked hard, but a harsh winter took everything. Out of desperation, he went down the wrong path. A story can stop a bullet, Mr. Cole, if that bullet is fired by a man who was once a boy, a man who had forgotten his own story. Doc said. The entire gang of Cassidy fell silent. Some of them looked at each other in confusion, especially the young man in Doc's story. Cassidy grew angry, but he didn't shoot Document. He wanted to destroy Doc in his own way. He captured Doc, tied him to a stake in the middle of the street, and declared, "Let your stories die with you." He wanted to kill Doc in front of the whole town to prove that these stories were useless. But then something unexpected happened. An old woman from the crowd stepped forward. She was the woman Doc had told a story about, the one who had hidden food for her neighbors. She said nothing, just stood tall, facing Cassidy. Then she began to tell her own story, not with fear, but with resilience. She spoke of how she found the courage to share what she had, even when she had almost nothing left. You want to kill an old man just for his words, Mr. Cole? Then listen to this. I am those words. We are those words, the old woman said. The crowd was initially silent, but then, like a flame being lit, others began to speak. A carpenter told the time he repaired a bridge, helping other townspeople safely cross the river during a flood. A father told the time he held his daughter and promised they wouldn't be afraid anymore. Each story, each word became an unbreakable wall. Cassidy had prepared for a gunfight. He had prepared for fear, but he was not prepared for stories. A palpable horror spread through Cassidy Cole and his gang. They were used to fighting with steel and fire, but now they faced an invisible wall made of stories. A farmer, trembling yet resolute, stepped forward and recounted how he defended his family during a horse raid, not with a gun, but with a wooden mallet. A young girl, her voice filled with emotion, told how she had aided an injured man, someone the Outlaws had left for dead. Each story was a blow to Cassidy's ego. He looked at the faces around him, people he had thought were only capable of fear. But now in their eyes there was no fear, only defiance. Their stories had transformed them from victims into storytellers, and from there into heroes. Cassidy was about to raise his gun, but he realized that shooting a person was no longer enough to extinguish their stories. Even if he killed them all, the stories would live on and become legends. He had built his reputation on violence, but the stories of the townsfolk's quiet bravery had overshadowed it. The legend of Cassidy, the Serpent Cole, became hollow, meaningless. Overwhelmed by something he couldn't understand or fight, he backed away, signaling to his gang. They turned their horses and rode away, leaving behind a town that had found its voice. Doc Finch was freed. He didn't stay to be celebrated. He quietly picked up his satchel, looked at the townspeople smiling and telling each other stories. They didn't need him anymore. They had learned to tell their own stories, and they had become their own legend writers. Doc turned and walked out redemption, and his old leather satchel remained. On the pages inside, there were no names of outlaws, but the names of a one-armed blacksmith, a resilient old woman, and ordinary people who had found strength in their words. History remembers the names, but it's the stories that made them. The real heroes aren't forged in steel, but in the echoes of a town's quiet bravery.